CBT Nuggets JNCIS Security Series UTM Unified Threat Management Web Filtering. Well, it's common knowledge that most organizations are going to want to block certain activities out to the internet. Most of us are going to have acceptable use policies that we have to adhere to. Sometimes it's just common sense. Well, when human nature is involved, obviously, if that fruit is dangling there for us to take a bite of, we're probably going to try and do it. So we have to kind of protect end users from themselves by using some type of software solution known as web proxy or URL filtering, and here in Junos it's called web filtering, that's going to basically only allow access to certain types of websites or URLs on the internet. Now, typically we're going to block things like adult sites and gambling and gaming, but we also want to look maybe possibly other things like stopping folks from going to hacking sites or criminal sites, or maybe dating sites or personal sites, or maybe even get strict with social networking. It really depends upon your organization. Some organizations will be very, very specific and very, very strict and only allow you to go to certain websites that are totally applicable to the job at hand, and everything else has to be done on your own personal device, maybe a BYOD, bring your own device, through the wireless guest VLAN, or from a special area of the company where they have computers set aside that can be used for web surfing. Okay, when it comes to business use, it can be a very strict environment. So it's really up to you. That's the feature we're going to look at right here, because this is not only a threat because so many of those sites have malicious code on them, but it's also a threat to productivity. And in some cases, if you're going to websites that involve hate speech or violence or weapons, the threat of litigation can be even greater. So we want to look at how we can manage this here in the SRX, in this nugget. Web filtering is a feature of the Unified Threat Management, like I said, that's referred to as URL filtering by Cisco. It's also provided by third-party organizations that provide software like WebSense or Smart Filtering, which can also be partnerships that companies like Juniper and Cisco can use to provide these solutions. What our goal here is to control access to internet websites. So here's our SRX, for example, that's our web filtering gateway. We have the users on the inside of our network, and they are subject to acceptable use policies. But as often is the case, they're going to try to stretch the rules sometimes. So we want to prevent them from getting access to certain websites out on the internet. But not only that, you may have a DMZ, and you may have administrators or users that have devices in the DMZ. They can also sometimes try to get around these rules by web surfing or playing games, for example, very common, playing games from systems that are inside the DMZ, maybe even logging on to a server as a basic user account and, gaming from these devices that should be just serving up resources to the public. So it's not just, users in the trusted zone who we're trying to prevent from going to, adult sites and gambling sites and other things like that, but it's other zones we need to be aware of as well. Now, we want to make sure that we don't just look at this as a morality issue, because some of the sites that we want to prevent users from going to don't really have to do with morality, so to speak. They have to do with productivity. So a lot of times you want to prevent users from going to like dating sites, not because it's wrong or it's considered a vice, but it's just not part of our, daily job responsibilities. It's not part of our duties. So we want to kind of, keep users in line by having them focus on their jobs, okay, as opposed to other things that can take their time away from their focus. We've heard all kind of horror stories about even government agencies that just have, users just sit around all day and surf the web, looking at adult sites and other things. So we really want to look at this also as a productivity issue and adherence to governance. That's a written part of our security policy known as an acceptable use policy. What is acceptable usage of these laptops and workstations that are provisioned? Okay, so we're preventing access to content that's not just inappropriate, but also violations that go into productivity. The web filtering feature, which is part of the UTM, is a user-defined policy. So as administrators, we're going to kind of come up with a list, a black list and a white list of URLs, okay, uniform resource locators of domains that we can go up to on the internet and ones that we should be blocking to the internet. All or most of the sites on the internet should be listed in some kind of distributed database, even though that's not the case. Even if you're using something like smart filtering or WebSense, there's always some new type of thing out there that may not be categorized yet. For example, one of the most common things at this point in time that isn't really being categorized are those personal cloud services. Okay, like for example, Dropbox. Dropbox or Box.com. These kinds of things can cause all kinds of problems, and they may not be categorized yet. And we need to be categorized to get the most out of this web filtering feature. And this is actually the personal cloud services is one of the big dangers right now, because if you go out and you buy a new laptop or you buy a phone, okay, it's going to have usually kind of free 30-day to 90-day access to these kind of sites. And these, because they create shared folders on your system, they're constantly uploading and downloading content. This can be a huge problem, these personal web or personal cloud services. So that's something we want to think about as we look at the list. Some of the most obvious things are, adult sites and, poker sites and things like that. But like I said, these personal cloud services are a huge area of vulnerability now. Juniper has partnered with WebSense. Cisco also has partnered with WebSense. You can use them with their URL filtering feature. Maybe you're familiar with that. Of course, we're concerned with Juniper, and WebSense is their main partner. And there are three types of web filtering solutions that we have. Let's take a look at those. The first feature we have is known as integrated web filtering. And this UTM solution is basically going to intercept every HTTP request. Okay, remember HTTP uses TCP. It's connection oriented, right? And we also know that it's everything's sent in the clear. So we're going to intercept every HTTP request in a TCP connection. And so the device, in our case the SRX, is going to make the decision after it categorizes. Okay, it categorizes, identifies the URL either from something that is user defined, a category that you as an administrator come up with, or maybe you're using some server, and that's where WebSense comes in. So you can use some service. This is actually in Juniper. Let me put down what this is called. This is called the Surf Control Content Portal Authority. The Surf Control Content Portal Authority from WebSense. Now, again, like a lot of the things in the UTM, this integrated web filtering service is a separately licensed subscription service. So you have to, get a license key for it, pay for it, and then of course renew it every so often. So if you initially get a license for web filtering and the license expires, after that point, no URLs will be sent to this WebSense category server to be checked. In that case, all you can use is the local user-defined categories, and that's what we see down here with the local web filtering. Now the second option is called redirect web filtering, and here we're going to intercept HTTP requests, and then we're going to send them to an external URL filtering service or a cloud service. Okay, and this is definitely sending them to WebSense. Okay, so you've installed a cluster of WebSense servers either internally or in your DMZ. You could also use maybe one of their cloud services. You need to go check out WebSense. And this is the kind of thing that we see that Cisco uses with its URL filtering, where you redirect to a WebSense server or a smart filter server cluster or farm. Okay, redirection. This service does not need an additional license because basically you're kind of just a proxy, right? Your SRX is serving as a proxy and you're redirecting it. So any kind of cost that you have would be, installing the WebSense servers into VMware or into Windows servers and dealing with that. okay, that cost and that overhead. So because it's a proxy or a redirect, you don't have to have a separate license for that. Now, the local web filtering service is basically you are intercepting HTTP requests in the TCP connection, but the decision making is done on the SRX, and it's looking up on a whitelist, which means it's a acceptable URL, or a blacklist, which is an unacceptable URL, and it's totally user defined. And again, it's on the blacklist not because it's, necessarily immoral, but it is not part of your acceptable use policy. It's just not conducive to productivity in your environment, or it could open up your organization to some type of liability, legal liability, if somebody in your organization is going up and it's a website that's involved in hate speech or terrorism or how to build a bomb, things like that. So we don't want to get we don't want to get law enforcement involved and some kind of forensics team coming in into our organization. So those are the three types of web filtering. You have to know these for the exam. Integrated web filtering, where you're basically getting a license and you're sending it to a surf control content portal authority provided by WebSense running on the device. Okay. The redirect web filtering, which is like URL filtering from Cisco, where you're sending it to an external WebSense cluster or server farm, and then the local option, which is often referred to as local whitelists and local blacklists. Okay, before we look at some configuration here, let's look at some distinctives of web filtering. Realize that what we're going to do is we're going to bind this to a firewall policy. And remember, if you have both antivirus and web filtering, and they're both bound to a policy, that you're going to do the processing of the web filtering first. So if a URL gets blocked by the web filter, then the TCP connection will be closed, and subsequently no antivirus will ever be applied. If you allow the URL, it gets passed on to the antivirus scan. Now, also, web filtering will support HTTPS or SSL TLS. However, if you're blocking it, the block page is not going to show up because it's a secure SSL. In addition, a URL category is used, and it's a list of URLs that are grouped up by content. These can be predefined categories, or as we're going to see here, they can be user-defined categories. Okay, let's talk about how this local web filtering processes. First of all, in step one, the SRX will intercept the TCP connection. Then it will intercept each HTTP request in that connection. Then it will extract each URL in the HTTP request and then check its URL against the user-defined whitelist and blacklist. Basically, allowed URLs and blocked URLs. If the URL is found in the blacklist, the request is denied and a deny page is sent to the HTTP client. If the URL is found in the whitelist, the request is permitted. If the URL is not found in the whitelist or blacklist, the configured default fallback action is applied. For example, you may want to go ahead and allow them to connect to the URL, but only a certain number of connections, for example. Or you can go ahead and allow the connection. You can fall back and say, we're going to permit it, but I want to log the action so I can know that they're going to this website. This might be a good thing to do, especially if you want to add more things to the blacklist and learn about the behavior of the URLs that users are using inside your organization. If you don't have a fallback action defined, then the request will be allowed. So let me repeat that. If the URL is not in the whitelist or the blacklist, then the request is allowed if there's no fallback action defined. And like I said, we often fall back onto logging so that we can use that information to populate further our whitelist and our blacklist. Let's look at the configuration of this. Okay, let's configure local web filtering. We want to first get into Edit Security UTM. And in this mode, we could see, all of our settings there. We're going to be doing, first of all, we're going to be setting. Okay, so we're going to be using the set command. So let's go ahead and set. First of all, we want to do some custom objects. And the custom object we're going to do here is the URL pattern. We want to go ahead and name this. Let's name it allow URL. And the first value we're going to allow, let's say this is our whitelist, right? So we want to go ahead and say http://. Oh, how about we want to do, of course, CBT nuggets. And let's do another one. Let's do http nuggetlab.com. And let's do Juniper, needs to be .net. Juniper.net, because .com is a credit card company. Okay, so we're going to, as you can see, you're going to build this allow URL pattern, and these are the ones that we're going to let our users go to. Okay, allowed URLs. Now, if you want to specifically block them, let's just go up here and say this URL pattern we'll say is block URL. We want to say no http colon / facebook.com. And let me just gang up on some people, twitter.com. And let's say we'll do one more. How about partypoker.com? You get the idea, right? So we added three to our whitelist, the allow URL pattern we created, and we've got 3 block URL patterns, or we're going to eventually block Facebook, Twitter, and Party Poker. By the way, you could use things in there like wildcards and, asterisks and question marks and things like that. We could also get into actual directories, for example. So we could go deeper into the URL. I'm just putting the fundamental .com, but you could go past that, / and get deeper into the URL. So next you want to do a set custom objects, and this is a custom URL category. Good sites, and the value up there is allow URL, and then we'll go ahead and say set custom objects, custom URL category, and we'll call this one bad sites, and the value, I keep doing that, a little dyslexic today, and the value is, as we know, block URL. Okay, now we're going to do our feature profiles. So we're going to set our feature profile, and the feature, again, you can see all of our features there. We're doing web filtering, and our URL whitelist for web filtering is good sites. See how this is all nested together? And then our URL blacklist is bad sites. Then we need to say the web filtering type. And here's where we see our 3 types. Okay, we're going to do Juniper local, but we talked about surf control integrated and WebSense redirect. Okay, so ours is going to be Juniper local, and this is of course how you would set those options. Then we want to say web filtering. Now that we're using Juniper local, our profile we'll say is the local engine, and the default action permit. Then we need to set our UTM policy. We'll just say UTM web filtering local, and then web filtering, the HTTP profile, local engine. Now, the next thing we have to do is edit our security policy. So I'm going to go top from zone trust to zone untrust, and the policy is UTM. We want to match. The source address will be any. The destination address will be any. Got to do the application, so from zone trust to zone untrust, policy UTM-WF policy, and then we want to match application Junos HTTP, right? This is a web filter. We'll go back up here, and then we'll say then permit application services, and then now we can get our UTM policy. Let's see, we're going to do UTM WF local. All right, there's our configuration of our local web filtering policy. Okay, in this nugget, we looked at the second UTM feature, and that is web filtering, also known as URL filtering and web proxy. I hope this CPD nugget was informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.